Well, Brad, that's a very difficult introduction to fulfill the promise. Hi, my name is Jing Liu, and thank you very much for inviting us to be back in Dallas. Florian and I arrived in the United States in the late 1990s. Yeah, and one of our first, actually, literally our first road trip in America was through Texas, and we came to Dallas about 25 years ago, and subsequently we came back to the city many times, and in the last 20 years what this city has experienced is extraordinary. It's one of the, I would say, beacons of urban development in America, not only focusing on building but also urban designs and just equity and accessibility and the health for the city. So it's really, really nice to kind of periodically be back and see the transformation of the city. Our office is about the same age, a little bit younger. No, not at all.
16 years.
16 years. Yep. We started in 2008 at the, if you can recall, at the bottom of the financial crisis. And that was kind of intentional because we knew that it was very difficult for the profession and discipline at that moment. Many of you probably remember, many of us had to change jobs, leave the profession, and we felt that it was the right moment to almost renew our vow with this practice that we love so much, and start to think very deeply about how can we take the experimentations and the practice forward with a different set of ethos and ideas. So today's lecture is called So in Real Life, I guess. And that starts with a set of ideas that we felt just deeply and emotionally important to introduce and explore in real terms of how construction can be done differently, how formal expressions of architecture can be experimented differently at that moment. And one of the most important concept was the idea of elasticity. And with elasticity also comes with resiliency and flexibility and openness and a sense of vulnerability that we can admit our fragilities and agility and be able to kind of embrace this system that we all, financial systems, social systems, material systems that are connecting us all, but we also have to give and take and interact with each other as a result of this globalized and interconnected world. So one of the first installation that we experimented with this idea was the PS1 Young Architect Award that we won in 2009 and implemented in 2010. It's called Pole Dance, and in which we basically took this Cartesian grid, which is seemingly quite rational, absolute, and almost uncompromising spatial idea, and made that with fiberglass poles with, so the poles became the columns and the elastic bungee cords as the beams. And as a result, the spatial system is something that's really playful, interactive. It's a game that you can play in whatever way you decide to do. And sometimes the system can also be pushed to the verge of collapsing. This was our first mock-up, and it only withstood one night, and MoMA immediately called us to clean it up the next day. And so we know that some of these ideas are easier to be explored in less permanent settings, but we continue in the last 16 years to experiment with similar kind of softness and complexity of forms with standardized materials that are very humble and not non-hero materials in architecture, but treating them with a sense of care and intentionalities, but also playfulness, so that they start to become the heroes of the spaces and forms that we experience. So this was one of the portico projects that we did in Chicago in the biennial, where we framed the only accessible route in the convention center with this monumental portico, series of portico that's made out of basically stud twisted into a more interesting shape. And for example, here a piece of stainless steel can be water jet cut in thin stretches, so that when we pull them together, much like a paper, can start to become three-dimensional and become interesting pavilion. But then they can be also squished down and then flat packed and shipped to other places. So there's this sense of mobility and transformability that we are very interested in exploring in real material sense. Another really interesting concept for us from the beginning is also that architecture does not have to be one directional, just expressing its own intentionality outward, but the engagement of the user, the engagement, as Brad was saying, the histories that's already there, the cultural perspective that's already there, and the experience every user and visitor to a place or an object, what they carry before them before they encounter this object in the space is also part of the experience and part of that the conceptualization of what that space is. This idea of interaction and the perception is very interesting for us. And how does that really get experimented in architectural terms? We often experiment with forms that are not strictly opaque or transparent, but it's somewhere in between, and forms that are dynamic, that doesn't seem to be static, and it's transformative. It's just this one moment of time in the long serial of times. And so the sense of engagement in whatever form is all welcomed often for us, and also to kind of break down what permanence can be in kind of very small everyday scales, and both in terms of how it gets constructed and how it gets fabricated is also very interesting to us. So for example, this was one of the earlier projects. It was a gallery building in Seoul, in one of the oldest neighborhood in Seoul, right across the street from the Imperial Palace. And we knew when we came into this project from the clients that the neighborhood was very upset with the fact that there's a lot of a big kind of contemporary art buildings that's moving into this historically very sensitive context in the neighborhood. And because many of these buildings are this abstract kind of box shape, modernist forms that somehow are at odds with the kind of refinedness and the complex textures and geometries of this old Hanok homes that surrounds the site. So what we proposed to do, which was immediately accepted by the Historical Society, is this a bespoke handmade cloth that we wrapped the buildings with and let the accessory elements of the buildings, like the staircase to the roof or vestibules, to take on the more interesting and playful and engaging forms around this big gallery box, and then kind of cloaking it with this soft cloth almost. And then that's made out of, maybe you can see here, made out of 500,000 stainless steel rings hand welded together. As a result, the form is something that doesn't seem like it's drawn by a master, you know, or like a drawing that's fixed permanently, yeah, but it's always changing, and it also has this really soft double curved form that can only be made with something by hand. And in this project, for example, in Hong Kong, on the Victoria Harbour, we were also tasked to make an art museum on the podium of a mixed-use building. But rather than making it completely solid, which is often what a museum and public building that displays works of art needs to be, but we kind of made this monumental series of colonnade that are also the environmental envelope of the entire museum, and they are just 10-meter tall glass tubes that surrounds the entire building. Although the glass is very transparent, because of this tight curvature of the tubes, they create this really constantly changing visual effect that start to blur the view from the inside to the outside, but also from the outside to the inside. And then the monumentality created this more I would say more institutional expression in the middle of this very commercial development, without it being completely shut off of its environment as well. So today we thought that we'll share 4 recent projects. Many of them, I think all of them, were finished during the pandemic. We finished 5 projects during the pandemic, and it was not fun to do C8 over Zooms and with a kind of construction stop and start. But we're very happy that this series of projects really kind of became the project that culminated many of the ideas that we've been exploring in the last 10 years. So 2 of them are arts projects, and 2 of them are housing projects.
Yeah, and so as Jing mentioned, a lot of the sort of early experiments around material and time and form and site and also labor, I think, informed these 4 projects. And in some way, Jing and I, coming from, a bunch of different places and having lived in a bunch of different places, are very much drawn, or the site, the sort of history of a site, this particularity of a place, really informs the way we approach these projects. So there's 4 projects. There are 2 in the US and 2 elsewhere. This one is in northern France, in a very small town called Meisenthal. That sounds German. This is on the border between France and Germany. Sometimes it was actually part of Germany, sometimes it's part of France. At this moment in history, it's part of France, but actually they prefer to speak German. And it's a place where, in this region, really the sort of European tradition of glassmaking emerged. I mean, there's different sites. There's obviously Venice, but this area is famous for its sort of very ancient, very early creation of glass. And this town was the town of a glass factory. You see in the postcard, you see at the center of the town is not the church, but it is the factory. And so this town is a company town, so to say, that has been there now for about 200 years, but it was started by this one family, the Walter family, that were actually roaming the forest, because original glassmaking was nomadic sort of alchemy. There were troops that sort of moved through the forest to find the right soil, to find the wood to burn, the stoves to find water, and all they had to do is add their own air, the air from the lungs of the people. And at some point, these 2 brothers, they invented a way to make a more sort of stable kiln for the glass, and they settled at this place basically at where a river comes out of the mountains, and that's where the factory started. And this factory grew out to be one of the larger glass factories, making glassware for tableware, basically, but all hand made over the course of about 150 years. And this is somewhere in the 60s when it had to shut down because of different production techniques and different industrialization. And so the town lost sort of its soul, its identity. What is interesting in analyzing sort of the history of this factory and going back to sort of a pragmatism of materials and the way, this is not a monumental sort of a church or a very rich civic structure. It's a place of pragmatics where material is used in order to serve sort of its function of blowing glass. And there was a competition. We joined and we ended up winning. And we so when we came there for the site visit, there was sort of some activity happening within the sort of ruins. There was an international center glass. It was not so international. It was mostly a few local people blowing glass. And there was a large hall, which you see here, which was used for some concerts. There was an organization that organized local sort of rock concerts, and there was somewhat of an old museum here in the old offices of the factory. But it was pretty derelict, and so there was an impulse from the region to bring this back and to make really a center for glass where these three different organizations could come together and actually have synergy between the individual organizations. There's three completely independent organizations actually sort of using these buildings. And there were some ruins there, as you see at the bottom, and there was a desire programmatically to also make a visitor. Famously, the Christmas ornament that we hang in the Christmas tree was invented here, apparently, and so it has one of the most well-traveled Christmas markets in Northern Europe, and so that was one of the other aspects. So they do have an income stream by selling Christmas ornament, and so one very important part was the Christmas ornament shop as part of the program. And as you see, there is a topography, there's rolling hills, and all these buildings are actually at a different ground level. And we were sort of very interested in the sediments of time that has this, the essence of this place is really layers of time that are sort of sedimented on top of each other. And we started to think about this ground as sort of a molten ground, similar to the way we turn glass from liquid into solid. And how can we think of this ground as something that maybe also has a certain fluidity to it, and the idea maybe of using the ground as an organizational element that could bring these three disparate organizations together on sort of a common ground. So rather than making a building, we actually proposed more of a sort of landscape intervention to also bring back the factory yard as sort of the center of the town. So we introduced this almost like a picnic blanket in French, a nappe, on which these buildings could sit as a common ground, and then lifting it, creating over this ruin a new entrance. So the entrance to the site now is sort of under this picnic blanket, if you want, into the old center courtyard. And there are the three different organizations sharing sort of a common ground now. And so this is the floor plan above the ground, so to say, and underneath a very quite rigorous or quite a large sort of intervention in the subterranean, because we needed to make everything functional. We inserted a new black box theater in the hall with dressing rooms, and so that they could have 5,000 people concerts, and the whole logistics of the glass making had to be improved. And we created a new entry underground to the museum from where you go up through the old building, which is the only real landmarked building. And here the entrance, the shop, the cafe, sort of a small auditorium and education spaces. And here all the storage of the Christmas ornaments. This is filled with Christmas ornaments. Quite fascinating. This was a project that took time. It was publicly funded. It needed to be phased. We worked in a very small community with a very small labor pool as well, and so it took actually a number of years, and we went through sort of different phases. So we started here with the renovation of these spaces, the glassmaking facility, then the black box theater, then the auditorium, and here we ended with the renovation of the museum. And so when you come there now, it's sort of the intervention is really embedded in the fabric of the town itself. And we've said maybe you shouldn't go and visit it yet. You should come maybe in 50 years and see how it sits and how it is sort of another layer of time that has sort of nestled itself within this context, within this wide range of sort of material palette. But it is certainly there because it takes on a little bit of a different expression, a different language, but in a way sort of nestling itself within and up, under, and around with everything that is there. Here the new entry into the center courtyard, poured in place concrete. And sort of this is the new yard with this the cafe, and above the education center on the second level. this summer we were there. And this is a complicated, this is the museum, so we will take you a little bit around the perimeter of the various buildings. This is a landmark building where we had to build a completely new sort of subterranean support as the new entry to the museum, and then up. As you see here. And the ground actually bringing all these different levels together. And so sometimes you can be, under this ground, sometimes you can be up, giving sort of new perspectives and also actually a new view to the village and to the context. And so we actually thought a lot about how the visitor would move in a way between these layers from above and below and have this experience of going in a way through these histories and through these layers of time, and how do they come together, the old and the new. The beautiful monumental roof where we introduce new daylight by punching in this reciprocal structure which is protected new daylight, and this is the history under the top of the roof. And then sort of at that level, a bridge that connects you to the glassmaking studios where there's artists in residence. They work with active new sort of production. It's a very important place in the region, and also actually in the international glass world with studios. And so history continues, which is the theme for them. The Black Box Theater, a large space with a large door, which on the inside can be used for a more intimate setting for 300 people with retractable risers, but then the back door that you saw there can open up, and the stage can be reoriented for large concerts, where they do concerts for 5,000 people or more throughout the seasons. So time continues, history continues, and maybe the material can sort of mold itself around these different histories. Jing, you're going to do the next one, I think. Yeah.
Well, the next project, the history is not as long as this region, but it's also in a quite industrial area in Brooklyn. Before going to it, maybe kind of a fun fact, Brad and I knew each other from 20 something years ago. When I was a student at Tulane, Brad was one of my professors. And Brad probably knows, maybe still remembers, that I used to dance and try to double major in university, in undergrad. And one thing we always feel, being an architect, a poetic way to think about it is that rather than the building as a static form, almost like a dance, that you're always dancing. And I really loved improvisations and in contemporary dance, where you're entering into a room, and a room of people and dancers that already has an energy, going. And there's your movement is never isolated from the other's movement. You're breathing together and working together with them. And every performance is always unique in that moment. And some of this project you would probably see, especially with the transformation project, we really feel that as an architect, we're dancing with the context and with the time, the flow of time together. So this project is in Bushwick in Brooklyn, one of the most industrial and artistic neighborhood in Brooklyn. And the context is a hodgepodge of mini storage, warehouses, artist studios, and then quite non-pedestrian friendly and quite messy and loud, and a lot of trucks going back and forth, but also very vibrant and exciting in a city that have very little of this kind of neighborhood and areas left. And we very much wanted to, so the program is an art institution that has artist residency, galleries, and performance space, and amenities that serves the visitors and the artists that work here. And the project spans over 2 blocks, with one building that's renovation, and the 2 buildings, which is this building, and then 2 buildings that are new construction in the in an empty lot. So this was one of the lot that a renovation came about, and that's what this building is. And then in the yard of that old, it's a stone cutting shop. And in the yard of that stone cutting shop, we inserted another gallery space. And so this was converted into a gallery space. And then we inserted another one double height gallery space here. And then across the street, artist residency and performing arts space. What you can see in this model is that because of the context being quite rough and quite difficult, it's not a pedestrian-friendly neighborhood. We introduced this volumes to be quite robust and almost a kind of the brutalist approach to these buildings and the volumes, but still giving it a softness in the way that it pulls gently away from its neighboring buildings and allowing a porosity to permeate through the entire 2 blocks, so that the visitors can enter from one side of the campus and walk through the buildings and walking through an alleyways, and then cross the street and walking through the alleyways and end up in the sculpture garden. And all of this is publicly accessible. But then we also put the most public programs, such as the bookshop and the cafe and the garden in the center of the block, so that the buildings start to create a boundary and a buffer to the outside, and creating this oasis in the middle of the block. So just quickly walking you through, this is the renovation building that has one big gallery space here, and with a front yard and a vestibule space. And then this vestibule is lined up in this view with this alleyway that you can see all the way through the entire block to this building, the artist residency building. And here on the ground floor in this new building, we have a double height gallery and single height gallery, and then offices above. And here there are 4 residencies on top of this building, and then the ground floor is a community space. And then this is a performing arts, kind of a flexible black box space. And it's also very important for us that we use material as much as possible in the neighborhood. There are a lot of warehouses that houses a lot of building materials in this neighborhood. So to just really be resourceful and almost kind of source as much material just within 1 mile radius, but still treating them with a very different attention and to detail, and also introducing different scales in the way that we change the textures and materialities on the facade. So really bringing a sense of kind of human scale into these buildings was very important to us. So here you see the series of elevations of how we were carefully calibrating that material change on these buildings. And for example, in the performing arts building that you see, the whole building is made out of concrete on the outside, but there is a material and a kind of pattern change halfway. And one of our heroing or very admired architects that we always look at is Lina Bo Bardi, especially because of her love to urban context and also love to the craft and working with people. You will see a lot of picture of her just being on the site, working with the craftsmen and welders and bricklayers day in and day out, and figuring out the details on the site when she was working on this public institutional buildings. So we were very keen on in most of our buildings to also introduce the expression of the hand and something that's not made out of standardized elements. And so, for example, here we have a nod to Lina Bo Bardi making this potato windows on this concrete kind of somewhat brutal buildings. And then in this kind of box buildings that we also introduced this gentle almost a kind of protrusion that's soft and playful. That is the seating area for the artist, but on the outside it also became a sculptural moment in the sculpture garden. And that also allowed the a different scale to exist in the garden. That is much more intimate. So here you see the potato windows that started to also have an eye on the streets and have that engagement of the passerby, although there are not so many people walking here, but still in those rare moments to increase that, interaction from the outside to the inside. And many of these geometries are not prescriptive, and they were kind of just serendipitously drawn in that way and cut out with foams and then became encased in something like concrete in a permanent material. And also started to require quite handmade details that to enclose it. And this is another building, the gallery building, that we used two different materials. One is a anodized aluminum, and the other one is just a gypsum brick. But really thinking about the way the brick is laid out, and we worked with Harry, who with whom we worked on many projects in the city.
This is Harry, there on the left.
And kind of figuring out an interesting way of laying out the brick. I introduced Aldo to Harry many years ago, and ever since he's been really interested in collaborating with us. So here you can see that we wrapped we rotated the brick 45 degree, but then that 45 degree allowed the corner to not be sharp and seamless. So when you go around the corner, the way that this pattern reflects and diffuses light is very soft, which was a really nice effect. And then this is the renovation building that we cladded the old warehouse building or manufacturing building with this just standard brick, but we rotated them to use the backside of the brick, which is typically unseen, and the coursing or the spacing between the two bricks are exactly the same spacing as the sides of the course. So when you lay them all out, you don't see the unit anymore, and it becomes almost a kind of seamless pattern over the entire facade. And at the bottom, there's this gate and a wall that kind of wraps around the building, and this is all made out of Unistrut, which is another material that's ubiquitous, but we never see them because they are hidden behind the ceilings. And we really brought them as the first material you see, and made that into the hero of the story. And here, the space in between all the buildings and the alleyways are just made out of, poured out of sidewalk concrete. But we made this custom raking tools and worked with the contractors to literally make this kind of sand, almost Japanese sand garden in the concrete. So they were very nervous of giving the liberty to do whatever they want. They said, "Are you sure you just want us to..."
But we didn't give them all the liberty.
Not all. We were there to dance together with them, but it's not something that was completely prescriptive from the beginning. So there's this kind of pattern that unified all the walkways between the buildings here. So from the top, you almost don't see the buildings, but when you're walking around the buildings, I think there's a very clear intentionality that people kind of find them and really think, oh, this is different. Although many of the materials is very kind of common and not precious at all. So this is the renovation building with a one-story gallery with skylights inserted in them. This is the bookshop, and we used quite a lot of also reflective material to bring the daylight deep into the space to create this sense of lightness and luminosities within this quite solid buildings. And this is the office space. As you can see that it's very well lit, and the double height gallery also has a clear story that brings more indirect light.
Wait, go back. You should show the the Lino Bobardi window as a
Oh, yes.
guiding thing at the alley. Yeah.
So this can be seen all the way from the other side of the street. So that was a kind of the destiny. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. That's not
Destination.
Destination.
Yeah,
Yes, not destiny.
Destiny would be
Yeah.
too much.
And on the inside, we also use, this is the seating area I was talking about that really pushed out from the large kind of concrete volume and then became this more intimate sculptured moment in the courtyard. And on the inside, because the space is quite large and we wanted to introduce a lot of daylight in here, and so the acoustic quality is also very important, that the space doesn't feel empty and it doesn't feel too large, although the generosity of the dimensions is there. So we lined the ceiling, but also the walls after, I think this is 8 feet datum with this acoustic gypsum board, which also allowed us to create a seamless surfaces because of the
The felt.
yeah, if we line the holes up and the felt as the wall coverings. So on the inside we have the felt, on the outside we have this formwork patterns. Great. Housing.
Yes.
Yes.
Second
difficult
half.
topic.
Very different housing. This and so we will show 2 projects. This is not our project, but this is what we were confronted with when we were invited to come to the city of León in Mexico, where, as maybe many of you know, a large, like the majority of the population lives in sort of self-built homes. Infonavit is the sort of Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae of Mexico that gives mortgages, and those mortgages are quite prescriptive. And they produce this kind of housing that fits sort of that prescription. But it means that a lot of these neighborhoods are built really far from city centers. And although they maybe start like this very crisp, they very quickly turn into areas that are very hard to service by these very rapidly expanding cities. They can't get there with public transportation, with schools, trash pickup, security, etc. anymore. So there's actually a lot of foreclosure and empty homes. And so the city of León, which is one of the fastest growing cities in Mexico, and one of the reasons is because a lot of the car manufacturing that used to be in Detroit moved actually to León. So it's attracting a lot of migrant labor that end up working in the factories. There's a Honda factory there in the back at the outskirts of León. And so the city is growing very rapidly, and there's a lot of self-built homes around these factories. Where the mayor had a real ambition to be a sustainable and compact city. It's one of the cities with a very good bus system and bike paths, but if your city keeps on growing at the perimeter and you can't service all your new citizens anymore, something needed to change. And so we were asked to work with them on a housing prototype, but one that would be sort of at the price point of this for this demographic, so to say, and it meant it needed to be extremely cost efficient. Now, it's the most efficient way to build housing is with a double-loaded corridor, as compact as possible, but that's also the most sort of dreadful experience one can have between street and home. And since the preferred way of living was living on the ground, so building your own house connected to the ground, that relationship to sort of ground, street, community was something that was very important. And so in this prototype, we were tasked with thinking how would we be able to build vertical, but still have a very strong sense of being connected to site, context, neighbors, and ground. The climate there is very moderate, so luckily the sort of difference between an interior wall and an exterior wall cost-wise was almost nothing, which meant we could easily introduce courtyards and have single-loaded corridors and a sort of open circulation system. And then what is very important in collective housing is that you actually that you can recognize your home. The danger often is that you get lost in the sort of sea of sameness, and so we wanted to introduce a sort of particularity and a unique identity to every home. So that's a nice ambition, but it's hard to think through how you could do that at a very economic price point. We worked together with eMovie, which is the local housing authority. Really sort of intense collaboration from concept all the way till the end. We did the concept SD and DD. They did the CDs, but a lot of this was really just designed on WhatsApp and through text. And very quickly they came to our studio in Brooklyn. We worked on a number of these studies. It's a corner lot, and so we wanted something that would make people feel proud and have sort of a clear identity at the corner, but also sort of breaking it down in smaller pieces. So these are various studies trying to create 56 units sort of distributed around these two courtyards, but with different massing throughout. So this is the model that came out of some of these workshops. You see two courtyards, one larger one smaller one, and sort of a rising up to 6 floors. All sort of walkable up. What was also important is that we left a few units out, and those units would be spaces for the community that they could share, where people could get together and have the social life that otherwise would happen on the street. And having a staircase, not just a regular sort of scissor stair or just not a scissor stair, but a straight stair, but also a secondary stair that actually wraps around and moves sort of up through the building, connecting these various collective spaces. If you have a single loaded corridor, it means that you can have cross ventilation. It means you don't need air conditioning necessarily, and you can have sort of with the courtyards a sort of stack effect. So there was always a sort of natural breeze that allows you to open your windows, yet you have people walking past your corridor. So how do you deal with that? So we wanted to have not sort of windows directly to the corridor, but actually sort of on the oblique, so that people wouldn't be staring straight into your house. And so we designed this very simple system of precast concrete panels, 2 panels and 2 window frames that could be sort of quite freely installed to produce this somewhat articulated and non-flat corridor. So this was our first image and render, where we imagined everything made out of precast concrete panels, and everybody was happy. But there was something where the client, or at least our friends at eMovie, seemed unhappy, and at some point they said, you know, this precast thing, it's really hard. We did a mock-up here on the right. I said, wait, you did a precast, you cast it standing up? And they said, yeah, no, we didn't really know how to do it, and it was really, really hard. But we were very good at that over there on the left, so maybe we can. And so what it turned out that basically there was only one precaster in Guadalajara, and they were 6 hours drive away. You know, there was no competition. You would have to install it with a big crane. They said for the installation of one precast panel, we can work with 30 people locally for 30 days. So can we not, you know, rethink this? And we said, okay, that makes sense. It makes much more sense to work with the local community on something that everybody can contribute to and work with. And so we wanted to keep this sort of articulation of these panels, but think through a different way in which this could be built. And we learned that the maximum an individual worker can carry is 17 kilos. So we did a block. Basically, we built this panel out of 2 types of block. One is a straight one, which forms the sort of say base of the panel, and then one that is the hinge point, and this is a corner block that doesn't have any similar angles. So all these angles are unique; they don't repeat, which means that at any moment they can sort of become the hinge, if you want, within the system, and it allows you, because the window frame always needs to be at a 90 degree, so it allows you to, at any moment that you need a window, to sort of insert it, and that's the way the pattern, the wall actually around this curvilinear floor plans was able to be made without too much drawing, but more sort of an instruction of how to put it together. And so this stacked forms these panels. This was their mock-up, much more exciting. Also, again, the hand becomes visible, and you start seeing also this idea of the light and the shadow that can be created through this sort of fluted pattern, and here it being installed. And so not with drawings necessarily, but with a very simple set of instructions, an offset from the edge of slab. And as soon as you hit that point, you insert one of those connecting pieces, you put in a window frame, and you start again. And so that gave us a very sort of varied texture along the wall. It's very easy to do CA like this as well, because you just look at videos on WhatsApp. And there it was. But that was how we were able to realize this. For $2.5 million was the construction cost of this project. 2 very simple window types and some block. And yeah, this opened also during COVID. We were able to go and meet actually the first families to move in. So the city offers this as, so they actually provide the mortgage. They interview everybody who comes and lives here, and they are the mortgage provider. But none of these people have necessarily paperwork or bank accounts or, you know, any social what is it? How do you call that? Your record? Yeah, your financial history. So that was really through interviews. They have to put the community together and sort of see how, a community of 56 households. And you can say, yeah, my IKEA doesn't fit in the corner, but we also, yeah. Plus, so we also imagine that this will, and we have not been back yet, but we can imagine that the entire building is painted and taken over and really sort of embraced by the new inhabitants and occupied. The great thing is that the inner wall is the outer wall, and that was certainly one of the ways in which we were able to be so cost effective. And here, sort of at the corner with the entry. And you see sort of its context in this sort of sprawling city. I continue, right, with this one? Yeah, good. The double-loaded corridor has been an issue for us to think about, and so we were trying to see if we could also do this in New York City with a project we just recently finished. And especially with COVID, we realized that actually the people were quite happy on the street. They were very happy in their units, but the journey between the street and their unit was where people, felt very uncomfortable. And you could see through the different images we could get from the news how just very simple things, as the way a window, a balcony, and the way you think about this relationship between your home and its context can have such a big impact on your experience of what it means to be in the city. In New York, also after or during COVID, there was obviously a lot of civic street life happening with Black Lives Matters. And this idea of how to think, and at the same time a lot of people left the city. And so when we think about housing and when we think about what sort of urban housing we would like to make, it's important that you calibrate sort of the way in which the home is like an escape maybe from the city, but actually more importantly, how do you remain really connected to the city, you're connected to civic life. And so the project, and this is one of 3 projects we're doing with a young development team called Tank House, of which one is an architect who used to work at Foster's for 15 years, and the other is the son of Tom Main. So they do not only read spreadsheets but also plans, and so they understood that maybe architecture can actually add value if you use it in the right way. Because obviously real estate and commercial real estate is very prescribed, so to say, in what works and what doesn't work, and many of the decisions are made on the ratios and the Excel sheets, and not so much on the plans. But what we try to do here is in some way maximize the exterior space, maximize the exteriority of the unit. giving units windows in 3 and sometimes 4 directions, opening it up, building extra balcony spaces, possibly the sort of cheaper space, more exterior space, but in that, creating a stronger sense of community and a stronger sense of connectivity to the city context. And so the building, it's 18 units. It's I will go back. It's basically 3 floors that are similar. In units, they have 5 units per floor, then 3 larger units on top, 2 commercial units on this side, an entry, a community room, and parking on the ground floor. We didn't do a basement. It's close to the Gowanus Canal. It didn't make sense to go underground. So it's a quite simple mix, but the way we organized it was actually in like 3 separate buildings, if you want. One over here, one over here, one over here, with the inner court that otherwise would have been the double-loaded corridor that now is this open walkway over these 5 floors. An extra balcony, so every unit at least 2 and sometimes 3 exterior spaces, one of them being sort of within this open courtyard, a sort of a stoop, if you want, or porch. One of the qualities is this sort of in-between space between inside and outside. And so from the outside, the building looks pretty hermetic, and from above, it's very strong and robust. But in the center, you see this open, porous, sinuous, and more soft courtyard. This also just opened last year. We worked again with a simple CMU block with a slight green tint and also a slight rotation. Again, the masons in the beginning don't like it, but at some point they like it, and they see how beautiful it can be when you do so, and really balconies as rooms, right, that can be used and can be part of the life of the unit itself, with 2 doors, one to the kitchen and one to the living room. So they are really more like exterior rooms rather than balconies, sort of part really of the unit and also of the articulation of the building, of the facade. And so you enter here on the more quiet street, but you don't come into a lobby. You stay sort of in this covered area, and this is maybe a view or a typology you could recognize places, but for New York City, it's very rare to have this sort of very exterior entry sequence. There's a little glass vestibule in front of the elevator for the mailbox and the packages, but basically we stimulate people taking the stairs as you come into this space, which are these walkways that are not necessarily aligned and then enmeshed again with a stainless steel mesh, that because the fact that these walkways are not necessarily on top of one another give a much more sort of rich and articulated language. The building inspector said, "I hate it, but I have to approve it." So that was good. There is snow melt in the walkways. There are sprinklers in the walkways and lighting, and so it was something that nobody had really seen before or sort of thought about. So it was very much a case study for many people. But what was also very interesting is the energy codes in New York are increasingly strict, and so this idea of having so much exterior facade is a challenging one. And it is mostly because passive ventilation is not included in the energy calculations, but actually we worked with the state authority to think about how we could have passive and cross ventilation, which is much more dynamic and complex to model, but obviously essentially the way in which ultimately people will or use this building is not necessarily by putting on the AC, but really by opening the window and being indeed connected to the exterior. And the thermal mass of the building holds sort of a very makes it at least last summer very cool. This is a shared courtyard that the units face on, and so here you see also one of these, or another one of these entrance porches where you can leave your stroller, your umbrella, your packages, and what have you. And so here the unit with the exterior balcony really as part of a room where you can get in from 2 sides, and you need to be able to have dinner on your balcony. another unit. We left all the concrete exposed, so it's simple in its finishes. But you know, if you have a lot of daylight and a lot of different views, maybe the you can have a little bit less luxurious finishes. The view into the shared courtyard, you can suddenly see your neighbors cooking. You might even hear them fight, but at least you know who you live with within the context. And look at that. Perfect for Halloween and other decoration, and actually it became very seasonal. So with Christmas, it had a completely different articulation again, and so people start to fully embrace and make it their own. And moving up to the roof, which is a shared roof, where there are two clients. You see, Sam Main is almost as tall as his dad. And looking back at the city and the context, and our office is not far from here.
Yeah, actually, here we put this picture in here because you can see, similar to Dallas, Brooklyn has always also been rapidly transforming radically in the last, I would say, like 20-something years. And our office is on the edge of the rezoned downtown corridor, which went from, I think, FAR 3 or 4 to 12 in the last few years. So all those big buildings are going up. And you can see here the Warren building, which is also it's nested in this kind of brownstone neighborhood, but then also kind of adjacent to this NYCHA housing, and then there's another one on this side of the block. And one of the most important urban discussions is really densification of the borough, because Manhattan you can't densify that much anymore. But you know, one of the most productive tool we have as combating, depopulation and loneliness and the climate change is the densification and the better design of our urban space. So we're quite committed in kind of thinking about how we can live closer, denser together, but also interact with each other and have healthy access to the outdoor and air. Our office is unfortunately going to probably be tore down very quickly, and as a result being replaced by probably a tower in the next few years, but we're okay with that. And our office is also a collection of ever-evolving, changing group of very young, committed people that are working all across the world and experimenting with these ideas in very kind of locally situated way. And before we leave the podium, I just want to also shout out to John Chow, who was at some point part of our very young team and was dearly called Uncle Chow for many, many years, and was responsible for the amazing details at Armand. Thank you.
One more slide. Look at that. Thank you.